Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and tonight I am proud to bring you Living Hellenismos with Tony Mierzwicki. Greetings and welcome, Tony. How are you, sir?
I'm doing really well today, Hercules. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm looking forward to your show.
I'm looking forward to the show as well. I'm very pleased to say that we have Jo Graham on the show today to talk about her book, Seven Goddesses of the Hellenistic World, Ancient Worship for Modern Times. I reviewed this book for my Pathos blog, Holistic Spirituality, in February 2023 and wanted to learn a little bit more about it. But first, let's have a look at the author's background. Jo Graham has practiced in pagan and Hermetic traditions for more than 30 years, including leading an eclectic circle for nearly a decade. Dedicated in 1989, excuse me, she took her mastery in 2004. She has studied the classical world extensively and today mainly works in traditions based on the Hellenistic cult of Isis. Though she worked in politics for 15 years, today Jo divides her time between writing and working as a guardian ad litem for children in foster care. She lives in North Carolina with a partner and their daughters. Jo, thanks for making yourself available today and coming on the show. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's fantastic to have you here. I really enjoyed your book, Seven Goddesses of the Hellenistic World. You wrote that readers will have to decide exactly how they'll venerate the goddesses, which I totally agree with. Everyone has to find their own path. But you suggested that they should have an altar and use libations and or incense, which are two of my favorite offerings. But you then wrote, if you do not use incense for personal reasons, feel free to skip it. Is this a reference to allergies or asthma-like symptoms, or does it refer to something else?
Actually, it's because I have a good friend who I often work with who has asthma, and
Oh,
incense sets off her asthma. So I'm just very aware that, anything that has that, a group working that has that particular friend needs to skip the incense.
so is she okay with essential oils?
Pretty much, yeah. But the smoke of the incense bothers her. So, I just happen to be aware of that because that's someone I work with often, and I just have to know that those particular rituals need to skip the incense.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving right along, there were numerous goddesses worshipped in the Hellenistic world. How did you decide on the seven which you present in your book?
Well, that was actually the hard part, was to cut it down to seven. But I picked ones, I wanted ones who were not all goddesses with very similar attributes, and who didn't all originate in the same culture. I didn't want all mother goddesses, all Greek goddesses. I wanted to sort of give an overview of the Hellenistic world, but also to pick some that were very familiar and some that were maybe a little more obscure to a modern reader. So actually picking the seven was the hard part.
I can imagine. So what I actually wanted to do was to work through those seven goddesses with you, just so that listeners can get a better idea of what they'll be getting themselves into once they start working through your book. So the first goddess that you presented was Tyche, the trickster goddess known to the Romans as Fortuna. Can you tell us a little bit about, so excuse me, I've got a cold. Can you tell us a little bit about her function in ancient times?
Well, she's the original Lady Luck. We still invoke her in a almost offhanded way as Lady Luck, be good to me, and throw the dice. And that's a very, very ancient invocation. Good fortune, the stroke of good luck that turns things around, or at the same time, the stroke of bad luck that brings you down. So her function is, she's one whose function has changed. Luck is sort of universal.
On my end, the sound is freezing up. Is that happening on your end, Tony?
I can hear it as well. It's yeah, it's definitely freezing up. So Joe, are you still there?
Joe, if you can hear us, try calling in again if you can't get the sound back on. Sometimes that works.
That's frustrating. It was just starting to get really interesting, and the sound dropped out.
I know, unfortunately, that happens. The age of information, these glitches happen even on professional shows. I used to feel very bad about them, but then when I watch YouTube to get my news and other information, they happen there fairly frequently as well. So we just have to live with it.
So has she rung back yet, or?
No, not yet. There she is.
Okay.
Welcome back, Joe.
I'm so sorry. I have no idea why it just flipped out like that.
It was really frustrating because what you were saying was just starting to get really interesting.
I'm sorry. I have no idea where it cut out.
Yeah. So we were talking about TK, the trickster goddess. You were talking about people using calling her Lady Luck and calling on her in games of chance, and you also said that she could bring bad luck, and then the sound started to drop out. So
well, I was going to say that I think she's one of the ones that is invoked most similarly. Luck is sort of a universal concept, so I think she's the one who's probably changed the least since ancient times.
So next,
one of the things I wanted to talk about with her is that she dares us to take a chance. That, you know, so often people don't do things because they didn't actually try to. You know, you've got to get out there and roll the dice or you're never going to win.
that's very true. So you see her as working with all aspects of life.
Yeah, because, you know, with a lot of things, it's no matter how hard you work, sometimes it's like the claw. You know, someone gets lucky. Someone is standing in the right place at the right time, and that's Lady Luck. You know, there are 20 people who apply for a job and all of them are qualified, and one of them happens to get into the elevator at the same time as the boss. Yeah. And that's just luck. But you have to buy a ticket to be lucky. You can't you know, sit on your couch and expect that somehow you're going to be discovered. And I think, you know, that's sort of a weakness that we have today, of the idea that if you're good at something, you're just going to be discovered without having to get out there and take a chance. You've got to enter the contest. You've got to go to the audition. You've got to apply. Otherwise, you don't give Fortuna anything to work with. So, yeah.
I mean, that's so true. I've got into music stores and heard guys play incredible music, but yet they never ever play on stage. They probably live in their parents' basement. So you've got to get into a band, you've got to start playing. And again, it's like you said, you've got 20 bands, all of them are very amazing musicians, but one of those bands will make it and the other ones won't. So that's TK's influence.
Yeah, and I see that all the time as a writer, that there are lots and lots of people who write very good books, but they don't send them out. And they say, oh, it's never going to be me that's chosen. I'm not going to be the one who gets lucky. Well, if you don't send it, you're not going to be the one who gets lucky. You've got to buy a ticket to ride and see what happens.
I mean, that is so true in your case. You were involved in Stargate Atlantis. You were like an integral part of the whole thing, and that is your legacy to the world. You've accomplished far more than most writers will ever do.
Well, I'm very proud of the Stargate books, and I'm very glad that a lot of people have found them to be what they wanted after the series ended. But actually, how I got that was a matter of luck. My editor, Sally Malcolm, was talking to a friend of hers, author Laura Harper, and she said, I've been trying to find some people who are really actually Stargate fans to write these books. And Laura said, well, why don't you ask Joe Graham? And Sally said, well, I've read Hand of Isis, but I don't know her. And Laura said, well, of course you do. You know her in fanfic. She writes Jack Sam fanfic.
Hmm.
And Sally said, I do? That's her? And of course, I had no idea that, the person I had talked to online for a couple of years in fandom was an editor who was commissioning Stargate books. I had no idea. But because of that fortunate connection, Sally messaged me and said, oh my God, I just found out you're Joe Graham. I'm Sally Malcolm. We have to talk. So that's how I got the Stargate books.
That's fantastic. What a great story.
Yeah.
So apart from the things that you mentioned, can you think of anything else that readers can expect by working with her? Are there any other anecdotes that you'd like to share?
I think one of the things is that you have to be willing to lose. If you're going to gamble, you got to be willing to have it not work. I've sold 28 books, which is a good number, but I have collected more than 100 professional rejections. I lose far more often than I win. And I have to be prepared to lose.
Yeah.
And then keep rolling the dice.
But it's your persistence, your tenacity that enables you to win, because so many other people write what they think is the perfect book. It gets rejected and they turn around and walk away. But you get hit upside the head with a rejection. You say, no, I'm going to put something else out that's even better.
Well, my personal policy is I have a backup when I send a book out. And when it comes back to me rejected, it does not stay more than 48 hours. It goes back out again within 48 hours, because otherwise it's too easy to say, oh, it's not good. Oh, I need to fix it. Oh, I need to do some more stuff to it. And you just sit on it forever. So my personal plan is I know where the next thing is going. I've got it ready and primed. And if it comes back, it goes straight back out.
Yeah. Okay, so moving right along, the second goddess which you mentioned is Isis, mother of the world, known to the Egyptians as Aset, who was probably the best known goddess of the Hellenistic world. And I noticed in your bio, she's the one that you seem to work with most.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about her function in ancient times?
Well, Isis was probably the best known goddess in the Hellenistic world, an Egyptian goddess. Her worship spread tremendously. Iseums have been found as far north as Britain, as far south as Ethiopia, as far west as Mauritania and modern Morocco. She had enormous appeal and enormous influence. And I think part of that is because she does welcome everyone. She is the mother of the world. And one thing that's interesting, before the Hellenistic period, most gods and goddesses are the gods and goddesses of a particular people, of people of a particular ethnicity or a particular place. They're tribal gods, they're gods of a city-state. They're not universal. And people who are not their people have no business with them. And that Isis is one of the first goddesses who says, they're all my people, everyone in the world. She does not discriminate on the basis of the color of your skin or on who your ancestors are or on where you live or where you come from. She is the mother of the world. And that means all human beings, everybody. And I think that gave her a real universal appeal in the Hellenistic world, because this is a society that has become so much more mobile and so much more diverse than most societies had been before then. And people were looking for something that was more universal, something that was less limited, something that wasn't tribal. You know, would you want to worship someone who go to a temple where your wife isn't welcome, or where your parents aren't welcome, or where your best friend isn't welcome because his ethnic heritage is the wrong thing for it? You know, people didn't want to do that then any more than they want to now. And Isis, as the mother of the world, is a unifier, not a divider. So I think that's part of her tremendous appeal then and now.
That's pretty amazing, and I actually have noticed that about the Hellenistic world, the need to unite disparate groups of people. The wonderful thing about Isis is that you didn't really have to do anything to change her.
Yeah.
Serapis was a created god. We had 2 or 3 gods coming together in an effort to come up with a male deity that people could relate to. But I mean, he was contrived. But Isis was able to be worshipped as she was by the Egyptians, and she started to take on attributes of other goddesses as well. She was and is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So what can modern day readers expect by working with her? Are there any anecdotes that you'd like to share? I've got like a formula for each of the 7 goddesses. I just thought it was the easiest way to structure the interview.
Well, I think one of the things to think about with Isis is that her story is essentially, in the beginning of it, it begins with a tragedy, doesn't it? I mean, she is the wife of a man who is brutally murdered, and she has to flee for her life, and yet shows tremendous resilience. And I think that's something that speaks to us right now at this time, especially when so many people have been through so much in the last few years, that Isis turns this tragedy into a source of strength, and a source of compassion. She doesn't become bitter. She doesn't become angry. She doesn't become vengeful. We have a lot of stories of vengeful gods. You know, there are an awful lot of classical, ancient Hellenistic stories of gods taking revenge on people. Isis doesn't take revenge. That's not who she is. She doesn't become bitter. She doesn't become bent on punishment. She is instead turned toward justice. And justice is not about revenge. It's about the restoration of Ma'at. It's about the restoration of balance. And so I think that's something about her story and about her character right now that would really speak to people, is to resilience, and resilience through compassion, that that love makes us strong, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Okay, so the 3rd goddess which you looked at was Athena, or Athene, companion of heroes, and she was one of the best known of the Greek deities. Can you tell us a little bit about her function in ancient times?
Well, I focused on her as the champion of democracy, and the story of Themistocles, and her as companion of heroes. And again, because that's something that I think speaks to us right now, that democracy was a very fragile idea. And Athena, as the champion of democracy, there are a lot of gods who talk about brawn and strength and different kinds of strength. But Athena, even in the Iliad, is focused on winning through strategy, winning through brains. She loves wily Odysseus, best of all the heroes before Troy. Not the guy with the biggest sword, not the guy with the biggest spear, but the guy with the biggest brain,
Yeah.
the guy who's got the plan. And so I think that was definitely the aspect I wanted to focus on. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I think that what you pointed out is like she was a war goddess, like Ares was a war god, but you pointed out she was a goddess of strategic warfare rather than just bloodlust, you know, bloodlust and murder for the sake of it, as you have in Ares. I also like the way she was a goddess of crafts, you know, spinning and weaving and everything else. So she was a very versatile goddess. So what can modern day readers expect by working with her? Are there any anecdotes that you'd like to share?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things about her is that she wants you to think things through, that discernment. And that's something you brought up, the subject of craft and weaving. That's also a part of that. Complicated patterns. If you've tried to do any kind of fabric craft, it's about understanding complicated patterns and executing a complicated plan. Having discernment, because our world, just like the Hellenistic world, is very confusing, and in some ways it's newly confusing, just as that world was. And having discernment and insight, taking time to think things through. I think very often people who want to manipulate us, either as individuals or as a society, want the emotion, they want the rush to judgment. And Athena says, calm down, think about it, take it apart, really look at this, get the information, don't jump to something. And I think that is incredibly valuable. I was writing this book during 2020, and so I think in some ways the crisis, I was thinking about how these goddesses relate to our current crisis, the crisis of 2020 to 2025 that we're in. As well as their ancient functions.
What I love about what you just said was you pointed out that she has a strategic approach to everything, a strategic discerning approach. So she uses that in relation to warfare, but she also uses it in relation to arts and crafts. Never heard anyone actually connect the two like that before. I always thought of them as very different, very separate functions, but you've shown how they come together. So I really like that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I think, you know, where these things meet is that this is about complicated patterns.
Yeah.
And seeing complicated patterns and making sense of what seem to be disparate pieces of information, but that are actually related. And whether that's war or politics, again, champion of democracy, or craft, it's about discernment and putting together information in ways that gives you the insight, the wisdom to act in a way that is not just useful, but that is appropriate to the situation.
Which makes it ideally suited to be the guardian and patroness of Athens.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so moving along, the fourth goddess is Atargatis, mermaid of the great river, one of the patron goddesses of the Seleucid Empire. Can you tell us a little bit about her function in ancient times?
She is a goddess who is almost unknown today. You know, she's not like Isis, for example, who, you know, most pagans have heard of Isis. They know something about her. Atargatis is very unusual today. And she began as a river spirit, as the goddess of the Euphrates River, but gradually began to take on more and more roles. And one of those is as the mother of the warrior queen, Semiramis, who Samarat, who was a great Assyrian warrior queen prior to the Hellenistic period. She's about as far removed from the Hellenistic period as, say, Eleanor of Aquitaine is from us. But you know, there are a lot of stories, Perseus, Theseus, etc., Hercules, right, of God, sons of gods. But this is a story of the daughter of a goddess who became a great hero and who became a ruling queen mother and a warrior queen. So she's interesting. Atargatis is interesting as the patron of ruling queens. One thing that I find often is that we tend to look at queens as, oh, this is like a ceremonial thing, it's a pretty thing, it's, you know, your job is to have babies. And, you know, in much of the ancient world, the queen is essentially the White House chief of staff. She is not sitting around looking pretty. She has a whole lot to do besides have babies, and raising rulers is by no means a small task.
No, not at all.
Nor is being chief of staff of the palace of an empire. And so, you know, these are not small or petty jobs. These are enormously important jobs. And to be the patron of women who wield power, I think a lot of women today are kind of leery of their own power. I hear so many women minimize themselves. Oh, I don't really have that responsible position. Yes, you do. Say it. Say it. Say that you have responsibilities. Say that you have qualifications. Say that you're extraordinary. Men do. Say it. You don't see, you know, male CEOs or US senators saying, oh, I'm just a little thing. You don't see that. So I think patron of ruling queens is an interesting one to include.
Women have been disempowered for hundreds of years, thousands of years even. So I think having an Atargatis influence in your life would probably be a wonderful way for women to achieve some of the empowerment that's been denied them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think she also doesn't sell herself short. And again, I think that's something that, you know, is an issue, that a lot of women sell themselves short. They don't again, you know, we talked about this with Fortuna. They don't roll the dice. They say, oh, I'm not really qualified to do that. Yes, you are. Get out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's wonderful. I'm a great believer in women being able to achieve everything that they have the potential to achieve, whether it be as rulers or scientists or what have you. I think the days of women being subjugated and left in the home and in the kitchen are long gone, and if they're not gone, they should be.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, but I think too, one of the things that tends to be a little pernicious is saying, well, the way that women can be powerful is to take on masculine attributes. And that's not what Atargatis does. She's not a king. She's not Hatshepsut wearing a beard, a false beard, and pretending to be a king. She's a ruling queen. And I think that is a real difference in the ancient world between Assyria and Egypt in, you know, comparable times. And it's a real difference today. There's, you know, a difference between lean in and saying, yeah, I do want parental leave. Yeah, I do want a room to breastfeed. And yes, I still have a brain.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to be a woman and a leader without denying either thing.
One of the problems with the ancient world is that while cultures like the Greeks had goddesses, most women themselves had very little power. It was only some of the priestesses that had power, but that was it. Most women were relegated to be in the home, be homemakers.
And
So
of course, that changes in the Hellenistic world. You know, you
that's very
start
true.
seeing a real difference. You know, from Egypt, as I'm sure you know, there are many Hellenistic and Roman tombs of women who are magistrates, women who are doctors. One of the altars to Atargatis as Deasura in the Middle East was raised by a woman who was a priestess of Artemis and was also one of the city fathers, and she's referred to as a city father, though she is clearly a woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Then you look at someone like Hypatia, who was an incredible scholar, and the Christians were so threatened by her that they murdered her one of the most barbaric ways possible.
yeah. And of course, that's at the very end of this period when, you know, this world is being destroyed. But, you know, it had thrived for 700 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, looking at that 700 years, I think is really informative.
Yeah, if only the world hadn't become Christian, I think things would have been much better. But anyway, it's just a personal view, and I don't expect anyone to agree with me. So moving right along, the fifth goddess that you considered was Epona, Lady of Horses, one of the patron goddesses of the Celtic tribes. Can you tell us a little about her function in ancient times?
Well, this one was also a surprise, I think, to a lot of people, because most people who are familiar with Epona think of her as a Celtic goddess, a Welsh goddess, an Irish goddess. That a lot of people are going to look at this and say, what is she doing in this book? She doesn't have anything to do with the Hellenistic world. Why are you putting her in this book? And it's important to know that in this period, there were Celtic tribes that lived in the Eastern Mediterranean, in what's now Macedonia, in the Balkans, in Romania, Moldova, all the way up into what's now Ukraine, into northern Turkey. In northern Turkey, there's the kingdom of the Galatians, which are Gauls. They're a Celtic tribe. Excuse me, I'm so sorry.
I've been coughing as well, so yeah.
And so the Celts are part of the Hellenistic world. And I decided that she needed to be in this book when I found, as I was looking around for some other things, that there was a shrine to her in Alexandria. And
Oh, wow, okay.
I was like, what in the world? There's a shrine to Epona in Alexandria from the 2nd century BC. But there were Celtic cavalry units which were in the service of the Ptolemies. And so they put a shrine in Alexandria. And so yeah, I thought that she was an interesting and useful addition to this book, and that she really shows the breadth of this world, this very multicultural world.
So what can modern day readers expect by working with her? Do you have any anecdotes that you'd like to share?
Well, I think one of the most important things about her is that she is very much concerned with the herd, with teamwork. Many of these goddesses, Athena, for example, like, you know, they like the solitary hero, they like the individual. And her focus is really on the good of the herd, the good of the community. and working with others to achieve things. In something like herding or farming, there is no solitary heroics. This is all about working together to survive and to prosper. And so I think that that's another unique focus that some of the other goddesses don't really have. You know, it's hard and thankless work taking care of horses sometimes, but I think sometimes she's an anecdote for our an antidote, not an anecdote, an antidote for our intense competition. You know, we turn everything into a contest. You know, you'll see if you stand in the supermarket line, the magazine headlines, the best chicken recipe. Well, what's the best chicken recipe? There's no such thing as the best chicken recipe. Different people like chicken different ways.
Yeah.
Maybe I like chicken with tomato sauce and you like chicken fried, and that's fine. There isn't a best. The best book, the best university, the best, everything's got to be a contest. And Apona really is, that's not her. She's really an antidote for that. She's like, there is no best horse. There is no best child. There is no best person. You know, it's this arbitrary competition gets in the way of teamwork. And certainly many of us see this professionally in various jobs. You know, the idea that you've got to be cutthroat and you've got to stamp out the competition. And certainly in every job I've ever worked in, that's a detriment. That is something that will really harm your career faster than almost anything else. Do you want to have the reputation of being the person no one can work with, the person who's always backstabbing and gossiping and trying to cut off your colleagues? That nobody wants to work with that person. That's not actually productive.
No. So it seems to me that she's a goddess who would facilitate civilization where people don't just live on their own. People form into guilds. People do very specialized tasks, and they all have to blend their efforts together in order for society to work.
Yeah. And I think especially in a society that's stressed, our society is very stressed right now. We are definitely in a crisis, and we're definitely shaking. And how well people can work together, how well communities respond, is literally a life and death situation. I was very proud of my small town during the pandemic, because through utterly Herculean efforts, we managed to keep children fed and managed to, make sure that children and families, children who normally had school lunches, but who were not at school for months at a time, got fed every day. And many communities did not manage that. And you think about the logistical function of how do you deliver meals to people's houses during a pandemic? How do you deliver them to a central spot where people can safely collect them? How do you prepare the meals in the middle of a lockdown? And to successfully do that is no small thing. And it's certainly no small thing for the kids who are getting them, or
Absolutely.
for their parents.
There was so much fear at the beginning of the pandemic. We didn't know how dangerous it was. And it was, in fact, very dangerous for some people. But I think the biggest benefit of the pandemic was that it showed us who the most important people were in society.
Yes.
They were not sportsmen. They were not Hollywood celebrities. It was the farmers. It was the delivery truck drivers. It was the people taking risks with their lives and working in stores, selling us goods and services, the ones taking meals to children. They're the people who kept our society running.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I am teaching, and I have a little kindergartner last year who was very she said, oh, during the pandemic I had to stay with my aunt and my grandmother a lot. And I said, oh, why is that? And she said, well, because my mom is an ICU nurse and she had to work all the time, and when she was off she didn't dare see me. And I thought, you have no idea yet at 6 years old what a hero your mother is. Your
Yeah.
mother was on the ICU wards, seeing the sickest, seeing the dying. And when she got off, she couldn't go home and see her 5-year-old because she might give her 5-year-old a deadly disease.
Exactly. And the first two strains were
Mhm.
absolutely horrible. We're so lucky that we moved into Omicron. But, there are
Yeah.
people who still have long-term COVID injuries.
Mhm.
It was horrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, the little girl's mother was an absolute hero.
Yeah. And, she's too young yet. She doesn't quite understand what her mother did. She understands that, even when her mom was off work, her mom couldn't see her. But,
Yeah.
I cannot imagine. Well, I can't imagine, but it would be terrible to not be able to see my 5-year-old and to, have to go into these terrible situations day after day after day and not even be able to see her when I was off work because it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous that you might expose her.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
But
amazing.
when she gets a little bit older, her little heart will beat with pride. You'll see.
Yes. Yes, it will. Yes, it absolutely will.
Wow. Didn't think we'd be talking about the pandemic, but there you go.
Well, we're talking about Epona and the good of the herd, and the pandemic is certainly about the good of the herd.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so moving right along, the sixth goddess is Aphrodite or Aphrodite, queen of the sea, goddess of love, one of the best known Hellenistic goddesses. Can you tell us a little bit about her function in ancient times?
Well, she has a bunch of different functions. A goddess of love, goddess of all kinds of love. And I also decided to focus on her as Aphrodite Pelagia, the goddess of the sea, the queen of the seas. Because that's the way that she was often invoked. We still have the idea the sea is the woman, the sea is fickle, the sea is a harsh mistress. And that comes from this era. Aphrodite is both the queen of love and the queen of the sea. But I think one of her reasons she was so attractive in Hellenistic times and still is now is as Aphrodite Pandemos, goddess of all people, because love is universal.
Yes.
And love doesn't know any national boundaries. Love doesn't know any boundaries of creed or race or gender or anything else. Love is the inescapable force, and it's for everyone. And so then as now, I think that's enormously appealing to most people, at least to many people.
I was going to ask you what can modern day readers expect by working with it, but you've basically answered that. I mean, we all still need love as much as the ancients did. None
Yeah.
of that's changed.
Yeah,
Our intrinsic nature hasn't changed in the last 2000 years.
not a bit. Not a bit. And everyone wants to love and be loved.
I don't know this for sure, but it seems to me that there are more representations of Aphrodite than any other goddess going to that period, representations of her in the scallop shell and everything else, which seems to indicate how popular she was to people. I haven't actually seen statistics on the number of surviving statues and frescoes and the like, but I think if she's not the number one, she'd have to be right up there.
I think so. I don't have data on that either, but absolutely, they're enormously popular then and enormously popular all the way through. There's she's all over the Renaissance too. And all the way through the 18th century, 19th century, she is perennially loved, unsurprisingly.
Well, she taps into a very deep fundamental need that all of us have.
Yes.
So she'd have to be prevalent.
Yes. And, you know, I think there's a tendency to think of her as the goddess of erotic love, and certainly that's part of it. But she is the goddess of love, of all the shades of love. In the story in the book, one of the things I talk about in that story is all of the different kinds of love that are exemplified in the story. Yes, romantic love, but also the love of a ruler for their people, the love of a father for his child, the love between friends, the love of a sailor for the sea. All of these different shades of love contribute to the people in the story surviving a terrible catastrophe.
Wow. Okay, so now we're moving on to the final goddess, and that was the controversial Cybele, or more properly Cybele, who presided over death and rebirth and was originally from Phrygia. Can you tell us a little bit about her function in ancient times?
In ancient times, she was very controversial. She was both loved and feared, and different cities, different places loved her, invited her in, turned on her, disinvited her. And I think that's because she speaks to transformation, and transformation is a very frightening thing. People like to have labels, and they like to have boxes, and they like to have labels for themselves and labels for other people. And transgressing, changing what you are into something different, is just as scary in the ancient world as it is now. People don't like that. People don't like the idea of someone they know becoming a different person, of changing their religion, of changing their name, of changing their politics, of changing their job, even of changing their gender. That we don't like that. It makes people uncomfortable. And so I think she definitely made people uncomfortable then and now.
Yeah, it's actually very true. People like to pigeonhole others. They put them into a little box and they feel they understand them and they can put them aside. And as soon as the person changes in some very fundamental sense, then people kind of feel threatened by it. They no longer understand them. They can no longer put them into that comfortable little box that they've been sitting in for the last few years.
And the fact that someone else changes challenges, well, what if you changed? What if you decided that you wanted to live somewhere entirely different? What if you decided that you wanted to be in a different relationship? What if you decided that you wanted to move to a different country? What if, we are right now in our time very stuck on trying to solidify identity, that identity is not mutable, that identity is a permanent characteristic and you just know what you are, and then you are that thing and you can't change it, and you have a label that defines you based on your demographics and so forth. And Cybele throws that all up in the air.
Yeah, it's so true. There are so many people who live and die within a 100-mile radius. They have the same politics as their parents, the same religion as their parents. They're disinterested in finding who they really are. It's just more comfortable to follow in the footsteps of your parents. So I think a little bit of Cybele influence in our lives would have to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a fan of Hellenistic deities. I've worked with quite a few over the years, and I'm admittedly quite biased, and I'm thrilled that your book is introducing a new crop of readers to a world which is quite alien, but yet somehow very familiar. Because
Yes.
we've talked about how human nature hasn't changed over the last 2 years, so the last 2,000 years. So have you had feedback from individuals or groups working your system?
Not very much yet, and I hope that I will. That one of the things about writing, unfortunately, is that it's like sending a message in a bottle. You put it out there, and most of the time you never know whether it touched people or not. Sometimes you find out years later, someone will tell you, "Oh, that meant a lot to me," but most of the time you're speaking into a void and you have no idea how it's being received. That's one of the few frustrating things about writing.
It's actually one of the good things about doing workshops and doing book
Mhm,
signings. You meet people, and quite
mhm,
often they'll talk to you about how things that you've written have changed their lives. So
mhm. Yeah.
that's one thing you could try doing. I mean, you've cranked out so many books. I shouldn't be feel really rude and audacious suggesting that you try something like that. Um,
Well, I do go to cons, and I'm going to Between the Worlds in April. So I hope that at Between the Worlds, I will, hear something from people who have read Seven Goddesses, but we'll see.
I'm sure there's going to be a few people there talking to you about their experiences working with some of the goddesses.
I would love to hear what people think. That's that kind of feedback also always helps me with the next thing, and that's true of
Exactly.
fiction and nonfiction both.
So, do you think that your life has improved through the incorporation of spirituality, at least part of which harks back to the Hellenistic world?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've sort of uh, found the Hellenistic world, or sort of gravitated to the Hellenistic world in my own practice, because it is this broad and welcoming time of expanding frontiers. Um, One of the things which I, know is an issue for many people is feeling like that they're appropriating the goddesses or gods of a culture that they don't belong to. And the great goddesses of the Hellenistic world say, appropriate me. I am the goddess of everyone. If you want to come, come. They're not saying, you have to be a certain race or a certain religion, or I don't like you if your skin is the wrong color, or I can't love you if you're not, don't have the right genes. They're very welcoming. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why I gravitated to the goddesses of the Hellenistic world. I want to worship people who welcome everyone.
Actually, you've raised a really important point that we've discussed on the show at least a couple of times in the past. And one is that certain cultures jealously guard their gods. So there are people in Greece who don't believe that anyone who's non-Greek should be venerating the Greek gods. And it's the same thing in some of the Germanic countries, where they don't want anyone venerating the Norse gods unless they have, absolutely white skin. If they're colored, they feel that they shouldn't be worshiping them. But my attitude has always been that we don't choose our gods choose us. And if one of the gods has spoken to you and has asked you to venerate her, then no one should stand in your way.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. And also, personally, I wouldn't vote for a politician who said that they wouldn't have anything to do with someone based on the color of their skin or their genes. So I certainly wouldn't worship a god who said that.
But it's not the gods themselves, it's
Yeah.
the people who worship those gods.
Yeah.
Like you, I found the gods to be welcoming.
Yeah.
Whoever feels called to a particular god should have the right to worship it. It doesn't matter, the color of their skin or their ethnicity or what have
Mhm.
you. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because some of the gods who began as gods of particular peoples have become more universal. But some of the gods that are more universal began as the gods of place. Atargatas, again, is a good example of that. And gods who began as gods of place tend to focus on the people who live in a particular area now. And of course, over thousands of years, many different peoples may have lived in an area, may have been at the same sacred river or the same sacred mountain. And they're not attached so much to the tribe that lives there as they are to that they live there. And so when people come in and make this their home, then they're part of this god's family, rather than it's about their genes. It's about, you know, are you living in this valley? Are you living along this river? And I think that in some ways is an easier transition. I would guess, and this is theorizing based on, you know, sketchy ancient sources, that Atargatis was originally Babylonian, probably a Babylonian goddess who was a spirit of the great river, but then became the goddess of the Assyrians, and then gradually, you know, increased in scope. There's a very interesting dedication to her from what's now Jordan. Again, not anywhere close to the Euphrates River. That's a man and his wife making a dedication to her, and they have Greek names. And I make the point in the book, we don't know who these people were. We don't know whether these are people of Greek descent who have become devotees of Atargatis, or whether these are people who are local in this area who have taken Greek names. We don't know, and we don't know because it didn't matter. It didn't matter at all in her worship whether these people, what these people's genetic ancestry was.
I hate to do this because I'm really enjoying this conversation, and the things you're saying are thrilling me, because that's the point of my station, both on Blog Talk Radio and on YouTube, to help spread the message that you so eloquently stated. But alas, we have to wrap up. I'm looking forward to a part 2.
Okay, so I've just got a couple of questions to ask you, Joe. What current projects you're engaging in, and how can people contact you to learn more about you? You're not on Facebook, and I track down almost everyone on Facebook, but you've kind of managed to elude me.
I am on Twitter, I am on Mastodon, and I am on Patreon. So any of those, Patreon, Mastodon, Patreon, Twitter. Yeah.
Okay, so any current projects you want to let people know about?
Yeah, I have a new book, a fiction book coming out next week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I just got the author's copies yesterday. It's called A Blackened Mirror, and it is a story semi-based on Persephone and Hades, set in Renaissance Rome. I think people who have enjoyed my pagan spirituality books will enjoy A Blackened Mirror, coming out on Monday.
They will. Excellent. Congratulations with that.
Thank you.
So, Joe, thank you so much for coming onto the show and letting us get to know you a little bit better. I wish you success with all your future endeavors, including the book that's coming out on Monday. So have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Tony. Thank you, Joe, for an awesome and incredible show. I will definitely be inviting you to come on several of my programs, because
thank you. I would love
your
to.
message needs to be heard and shared. So thank you very much. And thanks to our wonderful audience.
Thank you.
This should be on YouTube by tomorrow. And again, I'm looking forward to the next episode already. Take care. Joyous journeys, everyone. Until next time, joyous journeys and amazing adventures. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.